live. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay. All right, we are live. Good morning, everybody. Nikki Burnett here, Taste Life Nutrition. This is Taste Life Nutrition Radio, streaming live on KUHSdenver.com, the best station in the world. We've got some really cool talent on this station, so I hope that you tune in on a regular basis because we have people who really want to bring you amazing goodness, and that's what this show's about. That's what Taste Life Nutrition Radio is. We are about truth as best as we know it in health and wellness. We're about bringing to you the goodness of what life has, the goodness that people have to give, because there are a lot of amazing people out there who are out there to serve and to ask questions and to bring more than just what is the status quo, and to bring true health. You know, health is broad, right? It is mental, emotional, physical, psychological, relational, financial. It's all of the things. And today, it's dogs and animals. And I'm going to tell you that I've been looking forward to today for a lot of months now. And I'm so grateful. And if I come off nervous, it's because I kind of am, because this is like the most amazing thing. And I'm just super excited to have and to bring to you the amazing Dr. Jean Dodds, who is a pioneer in the world of veterinary medicine. And so, Dr. Dodds, oh, my music is on. Always my music is on. Thank you. Okay. Dr. Dodds, thank you so much for being here. I'm beyond grateful and so excited. Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here also, Nikki.
So, if you don't, and you should, but if you don't already know Dr. Dodds, she is, as I said, or as I think, you know, I said this earlier in my promo video, you know, a true pioneer in what we now call functional veterinary medicine or integrative veterinary medicine or alternative veterinary medicine. She was all of these things before it was cool. And I love that, because what I love about people who are, you know, the before it's cool kind of people is because they're the people who question. They're the people who are seekers. They're people who are out there saying, you know, this is what I was taught, but why was I taught that? This is what I was taught, but let's dig deeper and let's understand more and see if there's more to the story, because there always is. And you know, and sometimes it's even about maybe, and if I get this right a little bit, Dr. Dodds, maybe pissing off the mainstream a little bit, because you are going to question and say, hey, I don't think that this is right, or maybe there's more to it, and let's dig in and understand. I work really hard at surrounding myself with people who are big thinkers and seekers, and the people who have really big brains. And Dr. Dodds has a massive brain. So thank you for bringing your brain to us.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop rambling now, and I'm going to start to get into the show. But of course, as always, the way that we start the show is with gratitude, because gratitude can change the world. You know, let's bring as much goodness to the world as possible and be thankful for the things that we have, because there's so much out there to be thankful for. So, Dr. Dodds, what are you grateful for today?
I think what we'd like to talk about is, first of all of us in the world have a place. All of us are important. It doesn't matter what our genetic background is, what our lifestyle is, what our environment is. We should cherish each other's opinions and listen to them carefully. When I was a senior high school student in Ottawa, where my late father was public health director, I told him I wanted to be a veterinarian. He said, "That's ridiculous, Jane. Veterinary medicine can't possibly be as in-depth as human medicine, because all of my family on the father's side were basically in human health care." He said, "How could you possibly learn everything about all the different species? I mean, we learn about one species and it takes us a lifetime to really understand it." So after I applied to veterinary school, and they didn't let women in. That was number one. Wow. But in order to be considered, you had to have farm experience. It actually work on a farm. If you wanted to do companion animal medicine, you still had to stook grain, milk cows, do all those things on a tractor, which I nearly killed myself on. So I spent 2 summers in Travel, Quebec, on a farm in order to qualify to apply. Then they said, well, we might consider women if you got a 4.0 grade average out of 4. So, blithely determined to be a veterinarian. I never even worried about it. I just studied, got my 4, and got in.
Wow.
So this was in 1959, and it was a 5-year school in Ontario then, at the Ontario Veterinary College, which was considered to be the most modern of all veterinary colleges at the time in the world. And I had the honor and privilege to be taught by the people that wrote all the textbooks we studied. Even the textbooks from Australia, from Dr. Blood. He was our professor. And we were able to learn all those things from physiology and biochemistry and whatever. And in 1964, we graduated. And with the luck of the person upstairs, I was able to graduate first in agreement with Carlton Giles, a famous classmate who was the editor of the Canadian Veterinary Journal for many, many years, and an expert in bovine Lowney's disease, which is like a inflammatory bowel disease of the cow. So we graduated together, and we got up to receive our awards. The valedictorian, who was a large animal practitioner, looked at the audience and said, I don't believe there's a place for women in veterinary medicine. They should be at home and not taking up the livelihood of the men in the world that need to be veterinarians. And of the 6 of us women in the class of 64, 4 of us were in the top 10. So anyway, when I got up to receive my award, I graciously accepted it, not really saying what I thought. And my colleague Carlton said, if it wasn't for Jean striving to be as good as she could be, not competing with anybody, I wouldn't stand up here today with her. I've never forgotten the generosity of my classmate and the feelings that we had for being allowed to do what we need to do in life. So I was trained as a classical clinical research scientist. I didn't really know anything about alternative holistic medicine. But I finally decided, as you mentioned, Nikki, that there was something more to it than what we've been memorizing. Surely there must be explanations for things we didn't understand. Surely as science evolved to become more molecularly based, more genetically based, more genome-related based, we would learn more about how the environment affects the expression of the genetic makeup of every individual mammal. So 20 years ago, I foolishly taught people that 2 to 3% of the genome, the genetic basis of cats, dogs, and horses and people, for example, were based on the genetics. And the 98% that we didn't know anything about was just genetic junk. Can you believe that? I thought that we were full of genetic junk. How arrogant and stupid that was. And what we now know from the study of genetics and epigenetics is the genetic, quote, junk is what regulates the expression and controls whether the genes are expressed in a positive way or a negative way to allow us to live and hopefully thrive.
So I love that, and here's what I find so amazing and a little bit sad, and I try to figure it out, but what we find, or what I see, this is my experience, what I see in medicine, the conventional medicine, is if we don't understand it or fully understand it, then we think it's not necessary. So you talk about genetic junk. We have all of this stuff that's genetic junk, right? That is clearly not the case. But you go back to wisdom teeth, you go back to the appendix, you go back to tonsils, and of course these are all in humans. But we think, well, they don't have a place. They're only there because, well, we don't know why they're, since we don't know why they don't belong, so we just take them out. When they all play a role and they all have an important role in the body. And then we can go even further than that, and we can, there's this, well, it's there, it has a place, but it's really not that big a deal. So then we start to remove gallbladders, and we start to remove parts of stomach and parts of intestines, and sometimes these things are necessary, but I think that so often they're not, and can the downward effect of the of removing these things and having and more than that, having the thought and the view that they're not important and that they're junk, and I believe you and I agree, we are God created creatures. Things aren't there by accident, and things aren't there because, well, who knows, so it doesn't matter, let's just take it out. It just floors me. It's this amazing view that is beyond my comprehension.
These are Luddites.
These are what?
Luddites, Luddites, remember? People that don't have any thought beyond their own rigid belief. Whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just reading the life story again of Lincoln and his fight for abolishing slavery and all of the conflicts of interest that the people in our government did at that time, which is really not much different than what's going on today in other parts of the world. But let me just talk a little bit about what we now know. The microbiome, all the organisms that live in the bowel of people and other mammals, control basically everything. There are 200 times more microbes in the bowel than there are in the entire genetic makeup of the body. And these microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, toxins, parasites, whatever, control what goes on. What we have to do in life is promote the beneficial microbiome, those organisms that are necessary for digestion, assimilation, feeding, supplying the rest of the tissues in the body and the brain are paramount over those few organisms that are harmful to the body. And we have to keep this balance in mind. And one of the ways to do that is by balanced nutrition and antioxidants and probiotics and prebiotics, etc., to keep the balance where it should be. And that's really why I decided that I had to be more involved in holistic medical care. And in 1982, when our mentor Carvel Tiekert started the whole concept of the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association, I was asked, because I was very vocal at that time about the fact that we were probably giving too many vaccines to animals, just like we were to people, and that we shouldn't automatically assume that vaccinations will cure anything. Now, obviously, they have an important role to play. That's not a question. But we have to recognize that over vaccination is not necessary, and was there another way to do it? So I was invited to the Holistic Veterinary Medical Association meeting to talk about vaccinations. And when I got there, there was a holiday inn with those horrible orange shag rugs, that you could imagine all the organisms and dust and stuff that was in that. Oh no. So anyway, I sat there and I stood up in front of the audience and I saw maybe about 75 people. And I looked at them and I thought, these people know something so much more than I do about life. They probably know what I'm thinking. So I better come clean. So I said, okay, guys, I was frightened to come and talk to you because I thought you would wear sandals and ponchos and have beads and whatever and have a whole different spirituality that I didn't understand. And I was frightened to tell you what I thought. So the first thing that happens, one guy stands up and says, here are my beads. The other guy says, here's my poncho. The third guy said, here's my sandals. And I said, oh, can I tell you that I really believe? And they said, yes, please do. And then I realized that I really had a hand in each camp, that I wanted to look about the whole spectrum of complementary, alternative, adjunctive medicine, which has become so important today, even in traditional medical and veterinary medical practices. We may have the best specialists, the best clinicians, the best whatever, but more and more people that teach holistic medicine are becoming part of the clinical team. And so we work together in an integrated way, not to compete, but to be complementary.
Yes, and I totally agree. And it's important because I think what we see, there is still, I think, some pushback. We have conventional medicine who, they are very compartmentalized, which is okay, right? To an extent, they have their specialties and that's what they see. And they don't look at how their specialty affects the other parts of the body, so the cardiovascular surgeon, or not the surgeon, but the cardiologist, or the neurologist, and this is all they know. but then to bring in those who have that holistic view and have the ability to understand how to bring it all together, because we are holistic. Our body is holistic. It's not in pieces and parts. You know, you do something with your neurotransmitters, it's likely going to affect your gut, and vice versa. And you just you keep going out from there. And then at the same time, it's you go beyond that. You go beyond what's inside the body and you go outside the body. What's the environment like? What toxicities are there? And how are all of these things then playing a role in affecting the microbiome and affecting gut health and affecting all of the different parts of us, because it's all connected. And so to come together as the conventional, both the conventional as well as the holistic or integrative, right, it's so important because they're both so necessary. And I talk to people, clients specifically, but I would say this would be with animals too, especially when dealing with chronic diseases, cancer and things like that, is you have to have your team, because you have to have people who specialize and who can help you get through. And I think it's the same with your dog. If you see the best oncologist for your dog who has cancer, you might want to consider also seeing a good acupuncturist and also seeing a good nutritionist and all of these things. So you build your team in order to bring together those who are going to do best and allow you or your dog or your horse or your cat or whatever it may be to thrive, because that's what it's all about, is thriving, not just surviving. And that's a lot of what we see is we're going to do this in order just to survive. And that's not a way to live, whether you're a dog or a person.
Well, I think it's the quality of life. I mean,
yes.
We may love our animals and our companions so much that we want to extend their life when they're suffering. That's not responsible.
Yes.
We are their stewards. We are responsible for making sure that they don't suffer needlessly. And fortunately, in veterinary medicine, we have the option to take care of that, which of course is different in human medicine. And as you said, Nikki, I mean, remember the famous song, the head bone's connected to the neck bone's connected to the whatever.
Yeah.
Now, I was trained classically as a hematologist and immunologist, and the reason I got interested in it is because I had von Willebrand's disease. And I was born with von Willebrand's disease through my mother's side of our family, and it's the most common inherited and it's also acquired, but inherited breeding disorder of people and many animal species. At least 50 or 60 dog breeds and hybrid breeds are known to carry this trait. And so one of the things we did for many years is when people had dogs that were born with hemophilia A, that's the common form of hemophilia that Queen Victoria, for example, passed on to the royal families of Europe, factor VIII deficiency. And then there was hemophilia B, which was called Christmas disease. It's pretty interesting, and that's not after the holiday, it's after the first patient recognized. There was a patient in England, in Oxford, and a patient in Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles patient's surname was Christmas. And they discovered this deficiency, much less common than hemophilia A, called hemophilia B, or Christmas disease, and it's a deficiency or dysfunction of a protein called factor IX. Factor IX is a much smaller molecule than factor VIII, and in fact there have been at least 5 published papers in the recent literature that have identified the genes associated with factor IX deficiency and allowed to correct them, either by snipping out an abnormal gene by the CRISPR technology of the Nobel Prize-winning ladies Jennifer Doudna and another Charpentier and colleagues, either cut out the abnormal gene and insert a normal one, or if it's deficient, put in the normal gene. And so there's been one paper on correcting factor VIII deficiency that way recently. I'm just writing a review, so I happen to know about this. And there have been studies also on the disease I have, von Willebrand's disease. So because I got interested in hematology and immunology, one day I said to myself, well, surely those functions of the body are controlled by the master glands in the body, meaning the pituitary gland and the thyroid gland. And that's how I got interested in thyroid disease and how it regulates the production of all the cells in the body and the microbiome and the gut and the brain and their behavior, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. That's amazing. You know, we have the sad thing about when it comes to our animals is they're following in line with us as the humans. They live with us. And so as humans, we are dealing with what? Thyroid dysfunction, gut dysfunction, cognitive dysfunction, you know, all of these things that we do due to lifestyle. You know, it's yeah. So it's 95% of the stuff that we deal with as humans is lifestyle related, and then 5% you can blame on genetics, right?
Right. Yeah, 3 to 5%.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's only a handful of genes that are involved in this, and it's one health. Animals and people have the same mechanisms, and so it's one health. And by studying one, we can learn about the other. However, something very interesting recently was published, and there have been many, many studies of cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, where the human body forms lipid deposits, and we get clots, and God forbid you can end up in acute death. Well, it turns out that many animal models have been studied of atherosclerosis in people. In fact, I did that when I was a veterinary student in Ontario, with my first research with the famous Dr. J. Fraser Mustard, who was the first dean of the medical school at Hamilton, Ontario. Anyway, what we found was we would study rats and mice and rabbits and pigs, because pigs have a similar anatomical mechanism to people. And so we thought by feeding them high-fat or low-fat diets, all in a non-invasive way, just feeding them, and then we would study what happened to them, but we would be able to predict how to control atherosclerosis in people. Well, this recent paper just boggles the line. It tells you that none of those animal models were relevant to human atherosclerosis, because the mechanism involved in the animal species, other than humans, and non-human primates, is totally different from that of human beings. There are different genetic factors involved. Oh my God. 50 years of research on looking at the markers, you know, don't eat too much egg, don't eat too many fats, eat high fiber, all of the high fiber stuff is right. But all the other stuff turns out to be the wrong models for human atherosclerosis. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. And it's so sad because, you know, beyond just the studies being wrong, but we've taken it and we've politicized fat, and so now we have, you know, more atherosclerosis, more cardiac events, more cerebrovascular events than we ever did before, and then we're still fighting it, and we're still fighting, and we're like, you know, vegetable oil is fine, vegetable oil is not fine, you know, for animals or for humans. Sugar is not fine. You know, processed foods are not fine. Yeah.
Well, we define what atherosclerosis was in animals beautifully, sophisticated, and it's true for them.
Yeah.
But for people, we've got lifestyle, as you said. We've got smoking, we've got alcohol, we've got drugs, we've got lack of exercise. All of these things that are necessary to benefit human health are not being done the way they should in most of the world today. And then we have all the new invasions. We have the new avian influenza strain that is affecting people and the poultry industry everywhere in the world now, because the wild birds that carry it fly over to the rest of the world. Okay, and we have monkeypox again. Everybody is hysterical about monkeypox, which is really not that much a big deal, other than being horribly unsightly and lasting for 2 to 4 weeks. And the fact that people don't understand, it could be transferred from anybody on utensils, on food, on towels, on bedding, on anything. If you contact somebody or an animal like a rodent or a primate that has monkeypox. So it looks like little blisters all over the body and a rash. So what happens? Homophobia arises, and people say, oh, it's from sexual contact between consenting men. It's not that. Sexual contact spreads monkeypox, period. Doesn't matter how you express that sexual contact. Right. It's the contact with infected tissues that spreads it.
Sure. Yeah, the monkeypox thing is interesting for sure. I mean, it's like coming on the heels of the pandemic. It's like everybody is just all over the place freaking out. But what I want to talk about a little bit about is, you know, as we're talking about, you know, cardiovascular disease, and we're talking about, you know, the way that we feed ourselves, I want to talk about the way that we feed our animals, because when I'm talking to my clients, so I see both human clients as well as dog clients, but mostly human clients. I equate feeding kibble, which is the hard, food that we have been told by big pet food and big food and all of these big companies with really good marketing budgets, that they know how to take care of our dogs and that kibble is healthy for our animals. And what I try to help people understand is that they deserve real food, because if we're feeding them kibble every day, it's like us eating McDonald's every day. And so they may not develop cardiovascular disease, but they'll sure develop, cognitive dysfunction and diabetes and early death. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, early death, when we should have our dogs living to what? Between 20 and 30 years old, and we start calling our dogs at 8 years old seniors. It's heartbreaking. And it is, I mean, you're one of the people who I learned from when I started learning on my own dogs what it is to feed real food to our animals and how important it is.
You're correct, absolutely. If you can't feed fresh, organic, preferably, if you can get it and afford it, foods, you really should be very careful. And this whole issue about you have to have grains and grain-free foods or boutique diets cause cardiovascular disease and cardiomyopathy in dogs is total, unmitigated BS.
Yes, ma'am.
And I won't even say it out loud.
Say it.
It's shown to be completely untrue.
Yeah.
And so we prefer grain-free. I mean, grains are glutens mostly, and glutens are not to be given to animals that have thyroid dysfunction. We've just already talked about the role of how many animals have thyroid dysfunction, and people, by the way, today, because of what we've done to our environment and polluted them and depleted the ozone layer and whatever. And so we have all of these grain-free foods that are much safer. And you know that 40% of women in our country today, over 37, at some point have self-diagnosed themselves based on their clinical and behavioral signs, failure to memorize, good memory, poor cognition, they have gluten intolerance.
Yeah.
Why do you think so many gluten-free ingredients are available for people and animals worldwide? Because we need them. So we want to avoid, do people know that canine, spelt, farro, and couscous are glutens? Probably not. Do people realize that if you feed oats, it has to be labeled gluten-free? But even our famous Quaker Oats has two versions. The regular version, which is made in a plant that also has gluten grains, and one that says gluten-free right on the top.
Right.
So what I'm saying unequivocally from my personal experience being gluten intolerant since age 60, and I'm 81 now, so it's been a long time. It was very hard for me to live a gluten-free life then when I first started to. But I noticed that my weight didn't change, but my body shape did, and I looked like a pear. My ankles would swell when we traveled by plane anywhere, and my belly looked like I was 7 months pregnant, which I surely wasn't.
Yeah.
So what I did was, when I started experimenting and only avoiding glutens, I found that my ankles didn't swell anymore, my stomach became normal again, I had a waistline, I had clear memory and cognition, but I hadn't realized that I thought I was just getting old. Well, heck, my lovely late mother lived to be 99, so obviously I've got good genes in my family, so I've got to try to emulate her.
Yeah, it's true, and there's such a lack of understanding, about gluten, because there are, we know that there was a time, I mean, we hundreds of years ago, where gluten-containing products, wheat, was a staple. It was in unleavened bread. It was in, that's what, in part what people ate. But at least here in the States and in other places, we take it, we mess with our wheat, and it is not it's not a normal grain like it was. And oftentimes, if we are gluten intolerant, we can go over to Europe where they don't mess with their food, and we're much more tolerant of it, unless of course, we're dealing with autoimmune celiac disease.
So why does wheat, for example, aggravate thyroid dysfunction in people at risk and animals at risk for having thyroid disease? That's because the protein in these glutens is called gliadin. gliadin. And gliadin has exactly the same molecular structure as thyroxine.
Yep.
And so it's a case of molecular mimicry. That occurs when the body is exposed to something that looks like something else in the body, and if it's recognized as foreign, the body aims to destroy it. So that's what happens with Hashimoto's lymphocytic thyroiditis, which is the most common autoimmune cause of thyroid disease in the dog, and Graves' disease, which in humans is hyperthyroidism, and the parallel, somewhat like it, is in the cat with overage hyperthyroidism, which we know was triggered by iodine oversubscription. Foods that were given too much iodine that caused promoted hyperthyroidism in cats, including canned cat foods and the preservatives you put on the layer inside the can to keep it as a preservative. Looking at all we do, parasiticides to control heartworm, fleas, and ticks, and can be so dangerous despite the fact that they're the biggest money makers for the major big pharma companies today in veterinary medicine. We as people need to realize that the companies that manufacture these products and market them absolutely beautifully are doing it because that's their job.
Yep.
And they should be. That's what they're paid to do. We just have to say, is this correct for me and my family and my animals?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's frustrating because, you know, I tend to look at it, I'm a very positive person, but I tend to get really angry because I look at it like, how is it that these groups, whether it's the marketing group or the big companies, you know, how is it that they can truly sit back and say it's okay to feed these things or to put these toxic substances on our bodies or on our animals' bodies and say, yeah, this is totally fine. You know, what is it if we put pesticides on our body every single day, which actually we partly do when we eat our food, if we're not eating organic, but if we're doing this every single day, how can we not end up with a toxic overload? How can our body?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
look at the people that put estrogen-related creams on their bodies to help their skin, and then held their small pet against their chest, and their pets got gynecomastia. In other words, they got milk production because of the hormones they were getting in through the skin from their caregiver's body. I mean, think about it. It's just, but you know what happened? Because the big industries promote their products, they refuse to put warnings on the label about these, for example, flea and tick preventers. They wouldn't do it. The European Medicines Agency required it, and it was done. The North America, the people said it had to be done. In Canada, they put the warnings on the labels nearly 2 years before they started to appear recently in America. Why? Because the big companies said the number of doses they made and sold in Canada were not that many, so it didn't really matter. They had to sell their current inventory of gazillion million doses before they would change the label in America. So now all of these labels do appear with warning on pet foods in the product insert. Many times the advertising label has a black background with white print in tiny font size 7. So if you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't read it. Yep. But I will admit that all these companies now do have those warnings on the labels. So please read them.
Yeah, I mean, they're black box warnings, right? I mean, just like we have in medicine and with surgical devices or implants and things like that, these black box warnings. But yeah, we have to pay attention to them because, you know, these are things that we're doing to ourselves and to our animals every single day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. You know, you think about when we're doing heartworm prevention and we're doing flea prevention and we're doing tick prevention and we're doing worm prevention and we're doing all of these things, and then we're doing vaccines, and then we're feeding food that doesn't support the body. I mean, it's a hard thing to take in, and you know, I've done the same thing myself. I did it growing up. I didn't know any differently. But we literally are not giving anything to our animals that's supportive. It talks about being healthy, right? It talks about being clean and, you know, no worms and no bugs, and all of these things are good things. But we're switching the worms and the bugs and things for toxic a massive toxic burden on the body, and then no food to help the body to understand how to detoxify it.
What's really frustrating for me is many veterinarians, when you first see a patient with some kind of gastrointestinal disorder, assume they've got internal parasites. So before they do any checking to see if their actual parasite cysts in the feces, they warn them automatically with a bigger double rumor.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Before they even go to positive. Well, that's a stress. The animals are already sick, and it's coming because the caregiver wanted it looked at. And then we have people that say, well, because you're not being conscientious, Mr. Jones, and giving your heartworm preventive on a regular basis, every month or every day, if you're still using diethylcarbamazine, as you can still buy, by the way, in Canada and Australia and other places. I'm not saying you should do it. It's just some people think it's safer. They're saying, please give the 6-month or 12-month product so you don't have to remember.
Oh, man.
I mean, surely they have to understand that a product that will prevent this kind of infection for 6 or 12 months has got to have some residual toxic side effects.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so frustrating. And I'll tell, I feel the need to say this because, you know, not everybody should do what I do or what, you know, Dr. Dodds does, and maybe you should. Or, but what I do with my dogs when I've got 3 girls, and they're crazy and they're super fun, but what I do with them is when I take them to the vet for their checkup, you know, they always do the automatic deworming. I have to tell them, do not deworm my dogs. We can check for parasites, and that's great. And then if they come up, then we'll address it and see what we need to do. And there are natural ways of addressing parasites, but do not just automatically deworm. I don't vaccinate anymore. I do titers. I think, you know, this would be a good one to talk about. But, you know, again, we're going back to, we think we're keeping our animals healthy by introducing all of these immunostimulating and then, you know, substances, and then the immune system goes crazy. We can't figure out why our dogs are coming up with all of these conditions and diseases and dying early. And it's not, it's what we're told to do, and instead of, like I said early on, instead of questioning what we're told to do, we go, okay. And so be the ones who think outside the box. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do certain things, but it's ask the question why. This is what I teach my clients about whatever it is that they're dealing with, you know, if it's autoimmune condition, let's ask why. What's going on in the body that's created this autoimmune disease to express? So let's dig in and ask the question. And so I would challenge you out there to do the same thing with your dogs, to challenge, do they actually need the vaccinations? This does not include puppy vaccinations, and again, I want to talk about this, but, you know, do they need to have biannual deworming? Do they need heartworm? We're in Colorado. Colorado doesn't need heartworm meds, and we have people giving heartworm meds. We don't have fleas. Dogs are getting flea drugs, you know. I mean, it floors me. Let's think outside the box a little bit and understand why we're doing these things.
You know, one of the most annoying situations about vaccine effects is the presence of heavy metals in vaccines for both humans and animals, mercury and aluminum primarily. And do you know that there was a moratorium put on giving children infant vaccines that contain mercury, thimerosal salts, or aluminum until they're at least 12 months old, with an effective their development. But that doesn't matter. I mean, we have veterinarians telling people, we've got to give this rabies vaccine. And yes, Mrs. Smith, we do a vaccine made by company X that does not contain mercury. Well, guess what? I know, and the owner knew, the caregiver knew, that vaccine company doesn't make a mercury-free rabies. So in fact, the veterinarian had no idea. That was the one their corporate office provided. They didn't ask for another one. This person and the animal had a severe adverse reaction, had a rabies vaccine requiring mercury. And yes, the animal had clinical conditions that might have allowed a medical exemption based on the further booster, and a rabies titer to be used instead, along with the written justified medical exemption. And there are 18 states in America that allow justified medical exemptions for rabies, and the other states do it on a case-by-case basis. It has to be written, can't be based on the animal's age, has to be based on prior adverse reactions or chronic ongoing disease that is known to be aggravated by these vaccines. And so it's pretty interesting. I mean, this individual was horrified, but the veterinarian stood up and were using a mercury-free rabies vaccine when they weren't.
Yeah. And so that leads me to, oh shoot, I've got to, man, this is going by so fast. I got to take a quick break and talk about our sponsor. This is a problem. We're going to have you back on because this is way too much fun. So our sponsor, Cellcore Biosciences, one of my favorite companies, if not my favorite company to date, who are innovative in the way that they develop their supplements. They're innovative in the way that they deliver the nutrients, the herbs, the ingredients to the cells in order to support the mitochondria, in order to support our cells and our energy, and to eliminate toxins, including, I say this all the time, people hate it, we get worms too, so getting rid of worms, getting rid of parasites, getting rid of the pathogenic microbes that we may have, helping to balance the microbiome, talking about the microbiome, helping to support the organ systems to allow our bodies to heal, to regenerate, to repair, so we can live a life that we were meant to live. You know, and that's my goal with my business is when I work with my clients is we all are here for a reason. We all have really big things to do and people to impact. And if we don't feel good, we can't do it. And so I want to help people feel well. I want to help people keep their dogs feeling well. And then, you know, and Cellcore is a big part of that. You know, a lot of the Cellcore products I use on my dogs. And so I'm hoping they're going to come out with a dog line. I think that would be super cool. But I do use their products on the dogs. They've got amazing stuff. You can only get them through practitioners because they are strong and they work really well. So you want to be really careful about what you're doing and how you're doing it. But obviously, you know, you can post, you know, ask us questions, you know, on Facebook or wherever it is, and we're happy to answer questions for you. But find a practitioner who uses them and ask about them because they're good stuff. Or ask me because I use them and I love them. So I wanted to hit on real quick because you are obviously an advocate for the least amount of vaccines possible, you know, doing those only that are necessary. And what we're finding is rabies vaccines mandated by the federal government were yearly. Now they're out to 3 years, but you were involved in a pretty amazing study that pushed it out, although the federal government hasn't pushed it out yet, but it did show what it was up to 6 years was it showed?
Yes, this is the Rabies Challenge Fund.org, which has now been completed, a study that Ron Schultz, Lori Larson, Chris Christine, and myself undertook. And what happened was we were trying to determine whether rabies vaccines would give challenge trial protection for 5 to 7 years, beyond the 3 years of current licensing. Now, obviously, the vaccine companies were not involved in this study. It was privately owned, privately determined, nonprofit. And we studied the vaccines, and we realized that by age 6.5, the animals were still protected, but we needed more challenge vaccine for the 7-year period. And the only source of live rabies vaccine for challenge is the USDA, and they didn't have any. So we could not continue the study beyond the 6.5-year period. And the challenge trial data, there were 92 intact female beagles, puppies, used in the study. They each received 2 rabies vaccines, 3 weeks apart, as I recall. That's all. They were kept in a veterinary facility with free-ranging, a beautiful facility, well cared for. And when we were finished the study, there were 34, actually 35, but 34 beagles left over. And we had originally got an agreement from the university president and the dean of the veterinary school in the place where it took place, that any animals that were not studied, in other words, they never received any rabies virus, nothing, only the 2 vaccinations, could be adopted as family companions. But when the study finished, we could not complete it at 7 years, as I told you. The only challenge data we had was at 5, even though the animals were 6.5 years when we realized we had to stop the study. So we stopped the study, and the 35 beagles were scheduled for adoption. All of a sudden, the new deal of the veterinary school had no idea about the prior arrangement agreement, which I had in writing. They said, oh, no, we can't do that. These are 6- and 7-year-old female beagles who've never been spayed, they've never been on a leash, they've only been in outdoor and free-range housing, they've never made commercial pets. I said, nonsense. They said, well, what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm going to invoke our original agreement. I'm going to pay to transfer the beagles to us at Hemopet in Southern California, and we're going to spay them all, and we're going to have them adopted. Well, these lovely animals arrived. 34 arrived. That's, for some reason, number 35 didn't come. And they were frightened, and they were in cages, and they were basically well cared for. They said they were all healthy. One of them had a tooth abscess and a huge swelling underneath its eye, but apparently hadn't been noticed. So we took care of them. We got them all spayed. And guess what? Within 3 weeks, they were all adopted. One person adopted 2. And then we said, but wait a minute, what happened to number 35? Oh, they forgot about her. So they paid to fly her to Orange County, and we had her adopted right away. So in fact, the Rabies Challenge Fund was a success. What we have to wait now to see is whether the USDA it followed exactly the federal requirements for licensing of a rabies vaccine. So all of the current licensed rabies vaccine followed the same protocol. So our protocol should be accepted as equivalent. If that's the case, the USDA should allow the 2 vaccines involved to have a 5-year license. The question is, will Big Pharma allow that? Right. Because all the other why would you buy another vaccine if you can get one that's mercury-free that lasts for 5 years?
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah, and I think so, it's a huge lesson, and it's something to understand that a point that I want to make. Sure, we for whatever reason frustrated that this is a mandate by the federal government. For one, I think it's antiquated and ridiculous, but for 2, understanding that when you vaccinate, and if I say something wrong, please correct me, but when you vaccinate, it creates an immune response, and many times, oftentimes, for years to come. I think some of them are up to 9 years, and some of them are lifetime, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because your immune memory cells are committed. When you measure serum antibody titers, they may wane gradually and be at a borderline level or even negative. But if you stimulate those animals with a booster, and in our studies we did that with the non-adjuvanted feline rabies vaccine.
Yeah.
Do you have any mercury in it in a minute? We did that. The titers went from less than 0.1 international units per ml, which is the North American standard, to over 15 units per ml, which is way beyond the WHO standard, which is 0.5 international units per ml for export to those countries that don't have rabies. So it's amazing. The immune memory was there. We could demonstrate it. We knew they were protected.
Yeah. So take that to heart, please. When you do your puppy vaccinations, and I know that Dr. Dodds has a look it up, right? It's easy to find your published vaccine protocol for puppies. But beyond that point, there is absolutely no need, and my understanding is no data showing the need or the necessity or the benefit of giving yearly vaccinations. Am I saying that properly? That there's no data to support?
That's correct. There's no evidence that if animals have serum antibody titers and immune memory committed cells, they will not get infected.
Yeah.
Now they may carry it, but let me just, sorry, Nikki.
Yeah.
Listen, they can harbor that, for example, parvovirus. Animals that are completely, vaccination isn't necessarily immunization. The vaccine has to take and immunize the patient. If that pet is immunized against canine parvovirus, it can take in the virus and it can live in the body but doesn't multiply and cause disease. It could, however, shed to a susceptible dog in the environment.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay.
Right.
That's interesting. But I think my mind was going, we as humans, as animals, there are viruses around us all over the place that we're constantly shedding anyway. It's kind of part of it. And so that would, in my mind, it means, yes, that's a possibility, but let's look at keeping our dogs healthy. So if it does shed from a dog who may be a carrier, that our dogs have the ability to fight it off. And how does that happen? It happens through real food. It happens through exercise. It happens through keeping dogs calm and mellow and having a good life and all of the things that we talk about that are so important when it comes to our health and our dog's health. And then not continuously stimulating the immune system with all of these things that we think, that we're told, right? We believe it. We're told that they're healthy, and they are so detrimental so often of the time. And the reactions, that whether they're, I was reading some of your stuff, and there's a mast cell tumor from an injection site. Maybe that was from the person you co-founded the trial with. I can't remember what it was. Anyway, I read a lot of stuff. It's maybe all coming together, but these problems, it just, anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. I have a bad habit of that because we're coming to the end of our time and I can't believe it. And this has been so much fun. I want you to talk about a couple of things. First, I brought it because this is the book. If I do a podcast or if I do a talk or if I'm talking about dogs or even humans, I'm going to leave it here so you can write it down. But people will say, so what is your favorite, or give me a list of your favorite books. This is always on my list of favorite books. I've learned so much from it. I'm grateful to you for it. This helped me to really kind of hone in. I believe maybe I purchased it when my first dog, so I had 2 dogs who I learned off of, which I hate to say, but it's true. It's what we do. Both of them died of cancer, which is, it just eats me up that that's the case, but they did. But I fed them kibble. Even when I was feeding them real food, I did feed them kibble. And now I know better. I don't ever feed kibble. Anyway, I learned a lot from this book with my first guy who passed of osteosarcoma. So thank you for that. Beyond that, though, you have these amazing organizations and you have a really amazing lab test. So I want you to talk about these things that I think are kind of your passions, that this is why you do what you do, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
My passion is to understand and look at things and see them and think outside the box.
Yeah.
Our Canine Nutrigenomics book, published in 2015, has been a bestseller, as has our 2011 book called The Canine Thyroid Epidemic, which was given the Best Dog Healthcare Book of the Year award. We were thrilled with that. But what happened with nutrigenomics, in fact, even recently, excuse me, a board-certified dermatologist, not to be named, said in print in a large veterinary magazine that there's no accurate testing for food sensitivities or intolerances in pets than anything other than serum testing, which is absolutely not true. Serum testing for immunoglobulin E or D or G or whatever in humans and animals is not clinically predictive, and that's been well shown. The predictive test is the saliva test that we have patented worldwide called NutriScan. And I don't make any apologies for promoting the NutriScan test because it's been published in a peer-reviewed scientific literature and not based on people that write in magazines that have not been through scientific peer review. And in fact, there's outcome studies that there's no question. We've done it in the dog and the cat and the horse. We are now measuring biomarkers of oxidative stress in the body. Again, in saliva, a fluid that's very easily collected by the pet caregiver and the veterinarian under the guidance of the pet caregiver. And biomarkers of oxidative stress in people and animals are markers of infection, inflammation, periodontal disease, obesity, and cancers, certain cancers. In fact, in periodontal disease, we now know that if pets go in for their annual wellness checkup when they're 2 or 3 or 4 years old, they can have this test done on the saliva to determine if they're at risk for more dental plaque and tartar, so they can start their regular dental prevention earlier in life until, so that they're not going in when they're 12, 13, 16 years of old age with a horrible infected mouth that is affecting their heart and other body tissue, and have their teeth cleaned when it can be a risk even for the anesthesia required.
Yep. Yeah. So, sorry, I was so enthralled with what you were saying, I totally lost my train of thought. But yeah, so the NutriScan, I have a dog who I keep saying I need to get it for one of my dogs, and so I'm excited about that. It's interesting, again, it goes back to the mainstream. When you do something outside of mainstream, you're going to piss some people off, but that's when you know you're doing something right. So
well, it's a bit of a conflict of interest. I mean, dermatologists and gastroenterology specialists can spend thousands of a pet caregiver's dollars trying to trace a particular thing when it could be an environmental inhalant or contact allergy and a food sensitivity.
Right.
And then people think, well, your test showed that my dog reacted to rabbit, and she's never been fed rabbit because I raised her as a puppy. And I said, does she exercise in her backyard at the park? Yes. Do you have any rabbits around? Oh my God, we have another rabbit and your babies under our porch. Oh, my dog has been eating rabbit poop.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to become a detective, right? Where did it come from? The other thing that people don't understand is once the animal person has reacted to a certain group of foods, if you don't feed them and redo the test, the result will go lower and lower over 5 to 7 months and can even be negative. The person says, oh, well, my dog can eat that food again. No, they can't, because like vaccines, the immune memory recall will be reactivated. So they should never have that again. It's like gluten intolerance. Even if you're fine, you shouldn't eat glutens again if you can't tolerate them.
Right. Agreed. So is there, oh gosh, we're out of time. But I want to make sure that people know where to find you, how to find you, all of the things that you're up to, you know, what you want people to know, because you're doing so many things out there. I want to make sure that you talk about that.
Okay, the main website to reach us is at www.hemopet.org. And we're a federally registered nonprofit charity. You can put, if you want to reach me specifically, put in a subject line for Dr. Dodds. You can ask any questions you want based on this podcast. I'm more than happy to help. There's no charge for our responses. Our goal is to help you learn more and research more. For example, question for all of our listeners today. How do whales and other marine mammals sleep?
How do what? Say that one more time.
How do whales and other marine mammals like dolphins sleep?
Oh, that's a good question.
What do they do all day if they're swimming around? How do they rest? I bet you don't know the answer.
No.
It's very interesting.
No, tell me.
No, I'm not going to tell you.
Oh.
Your listeners got to look it up.
Okay. Well, I love it. You're going to give us some homework.
The 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds savants will know the answer, but we won't.
That's amazing. I love it. Okay, I'm gonna check it out because I have no idea.
And then you can stump all your friends. We have orcas swimming outside the sea here, right in front of our window. So that was why I said to my husband the other morning, how do they sleep? Sure, they must sleep. And do they go up, get some, oxygen, and then dive down and sleep? Where do they sleep? Is it like octopus? If you haven't seen the documentary on octopus, you've got to see it.
All right.
It's the most incredibly poignant story about how the octopus lives and what they do as a family community to survive.
Amazing. I love that. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your time, for you joining us. This has been such a blessing and a pleasure for me. I am seriously so grateful. So we're going to jump off. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. You can find me, tastelifenutrition.com, everywhere, Taste Life Nutrition, all the social media. And we will see you next week. Bye, everybody. Stay with me a second, Dr. Dodds, please.
You're welcome. Bye, everybody. Love each other.